whether it be warming or cooling, prepare for, in a sense?
That would probably be optimal if we did both. If we have evidence that points to this or that. Or can it be this and that at the same time? The evidence says it does happen. We go through cooler times, we go through warmer times. Back in 1350 to 1700, we went through something called Little Ice Age, where literally you could ice skate on the Thames River outside of London and on the Hudson River outside of New York in the summer. How did that happen? So the point of this then is, Morpheus says, the danger we have is that perhaps the wool is being pulled over our eyes, whether it's intentional or not. Knowledge depends on having accurate information so we can make accurate assessments, so we can make accurate decisions. When we get to you're in my ethics class, we get to finances eventually, and I'll point out that credit is a lie. Credit is debt. It means you're spending tomorrow before you have the cash for it. So you limit your possibilities in your future because you literally have run out of money. But you're not told that. You're told credit's a good thing. You can buy things now and pay for them later. And you can. That's how credit works. But that's what debt is. You get it now, but you pay it off later, which means if you don't have money to pay it off now, then whatever money you do have, you're going to have to spend on what you did yesterday rather than going in the store. And I'm not preaching to the choir. I don't mean it that way. The point of this is having true knowledge prepares us for action. How do we know what's true and what isn't? Morpheus says we live in a world where the wool can easily be pulled over our eyes. And if we don't have any sense of having to know what we know so that we can act on it, we're at a handicap. So I listened to a fellow yesterday on a news channel. He was a meteorologist. Meteorologists predict weather. I've heard him before. He was very good. The national media said Irma was coming right up the coast of Florida, and he said, no, it's coming up the spine. Lakeland's going to get hammered, and we'll get a Cat 1. He was right on the mark. He's very good about it. But yesterday he said, because he was talking about the blood red moon, he said if it wasn't for the atmosphere, we wouldn't be able to see the moon. And I immediately thought, well, how did we see the Earth from the moon? There's no atmosphere up there. Evidently, you don't need atmosphere to see outside the planet and see what exists out there. And yet he told that to who knows how many hundreds of thousands or millions of people watched that newscast and walked away from there thinking, wow, that's interesting. I'm glad we have atmosphere. We wouldn't know there's a moon there. And that's just not true. Now, I don't think it was malicious. I don't think he was pulling the wool over our eyes. It was misinformation. But how many people would believe it? Harvest moon is orange and large, and it gets higher in the sky and is smaller and yellow, and then it gets to what we call it its apex, the high point, and it's white, and it's none of those colors. Turns out it's gray. We're seeing reflective light through our atmosphere. It acts like a prism, and it changes colors based on density or lack of density. How do we know that? Because people have taken the time to examine those things so we know what the truth is about the moon. How many of you know the moon is moving 3 centimeters away every year? It's escaping our orbit very slowly, 3 centimeters. It's not very much. How do we know that? Some bright person, when we went to the moon, you know, the people who deny we went to the moon, some bright person when we went to the moon put a mirror up there facing the Earth so that every year we can shoot a laser beam at it, and it takes time to get there and come back, and we measure the time, and the farther away something is, the more time it takes to come back, and it's incrementally more time. And we've measured it, and it says 3 centimeters a year. It's moving away. What does that mean? Well, for us, it means nothing. 100,000 years from now, a million years from now, when it escapes our orbit, it's going to mean a whole lot if there's any human life left on the planet. We right now are 27.5 degrees tilt. The scientists say we'll go to 90 degrees and the whole weather on the planet will change. Jupiter will then become the major influencer of our orbit and the tilt that we have, and it'll change the climate. Well, I don't care. I'm not going to be here. But what I care about is the truth, is understanding things so that maybe we can prepare. Maybe we can't. We have to accept the inevitability.
Don't think you are. Know you are. Sure.
So we come to the role of the philosopher, trying to get you to the door, trying to see if anybody wants to open the door, seeing if anybody wants to walk through the door, see what's on the other side. Is it Alice's rabbit hole, or is there something there that's maybe important for us to know about? One more.
You have to let it all go, Neil. Fear, doubt, disbelief. Free your mind. This can be what? Be real.
Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that asks the question,
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
These questions of casting doubt on all of our knowledge was the first step in tearing down our knowledge, reducing it to its foundations, and then building it back up again. René Descartes, who was one of the great Renaissance geniuses.
Descartes was amazing. He was a great scientist and a tremendously imaginative and resourceful scientist. I think no scientist has ever been more ambitious. He thought he had a theory of everything.
And he saw himself ultimately as a natural scientist, and philosophy for him was just part of his program. He wanted to get everything down to its foundation.
When he performed that methodical doubt, the one thing he thought he could not doubt was,
Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
that is, I as a thinker am, as a res cogitans, a thinking thing.
His basic idea that we only have access to the content of our own minds gives us this thing called the problem of the external world.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to do.
So the problem this week is this, people. We're hardwired to be sensatory people. We sense things with our eyes, with our hands, taste, smell. We're just a completely sensory being. But we also have the capacity to think, and we have the capacity to engage in thought. Some thoughts arise from feelings, other thoughts contradict our feelings. That's why we went through logic last week, to show you that there's a proper way to think according to the Western world. We call that deductive logic, and we also discovered that was also inductive logic. But we have these senses, and these senses give us our primary information about the world. Sometime in your late teens, reason kicks in, critical thinking, abstract thinking kicks in, and up until then, everything has been sensory. And we've learned to trust what we see, what we taste, what we smell, what we feel. French philosopher René Descartes thought if he could get rid of all the senses in his mind, because they can deceive us. There's always the story about a frog that they put in a pan of water and they slowly increase the heat of the water and the frog has no idea he's about to be boiled. And if they would do that to you, I don't know how many of you have gotten into a hot shower or actually a cold shower, and you need to turn the heat up and turn the heat up, and then it gets to a degree where it's too hot and then you have to turn it down, or you have it real hot because you came out of the cold and it feels good, and then it's too hot and you have to turn it down. Your senses can deceive you. You can literally boil a frog before the frog knows what's going on. We know that about our senses. They're accurate, but they're also inaccurate. They can deceive us as well as give us the proper amount of information. Here's the problem. We're hardwired into this four-dimensional world through sensory perceptions, electronic signals that are interpreted by your brain. Now, at the end of this semester, we'll talk about free will, that you can think for yourself and you can make decisions for yourself, and I'm going to challenge that. We've now done experiments. In France, they did experiments. They took people and they lined them up and they put little electrodes on their head and they had little machines to record what was going on, and they said, as soon as you're hungry, raise your hand. Or as soon as you're thirsty, raise your hand. And so people went through whatever the program was, and suddenly someone realized they were thirsty and they said, I'm thirsty. And someone realized they were hungry and they raised their hand and said, I'm hungry. And the problem with that was the machines that were recording what was going on in their head recorded brain waves before they realized they were hungry and just before they realized they were thirsty. The question then became, so is hunger and thirst a condition of your inner self, what we call the inner self, your body reacting to what it needs, and then it located your mind and said, by the way, you're thirsty, by the way, you're hungry, and then we intellectually say, well, I want this to drink, I want this to eat. In other words, are you responding to electrical impulses before you consciously recognize those impulses? This is a test that's been repeated over and over. It's really, really interesting, because if that's true, my free will then comes after my body tells me something, and then I get to make choices. But maybe I'm not quite as independent-minded as I think I am. Well, we're all independent-minded, aren't we? Don't we all have free will? I have the capacity to make decisions. I don't know if that's free will. We've been taught we have free will, but if my body is telling me something and I'm reacting to it, my body certainly has the capacity to communicate with me before I know, quote unquote, what's really going on with me. So electrical impulses are notifying me certain information sensatorily, and my mind then, my rational part, is then responding to them. That might create a problem when we get to the free will module in this class. The philosopher says this requires that we reduce all of our sensory knowledge down to its foundational building blocks and then building back up again, only this time using reason. So here's the problem. We assume reason can't go wrong. Well, logic tells us it can go wrong, whether it's deductive logic or inductive logic, just like your senses can go wrong. The assumption in the West is that reason is the key to understanding. If we learn logic, deductive and inductive logic, we learn that it can be used correctly or incorrectly, and we motivate ourselves to use it correctly, add experimentation to it, we'll come to true knowledge that we can act on, and that will be the way that we need to respond. The problem with that is reason does not work that way. You have to learn how to use reason, just like you have to learn how to discern or distinguish sensory information that comes into your body. Any questions about what I'm saying to you? Rene Descartes issues, you'll see this on your quiz, people, that's why it's up here. There's a famous Latin phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Descartes said he could doubt everything around him, but he was a doubter himself. That was the one thing he couldn't doubt, that he was a thinker, that he could doubt everything else. You're all just in my dream. I've had this dream periodically, that in the classroom no one will shut up. Everybody's talking. No one's following my rules. Or I have another dream, that I can't find my car. It doesn't matter where I look, it can't be found. Very real dream, and I know when I'm dreaming.